from Nashville, this is Dreamland. Take a deep breath, folks, for today our subject is the Temple of Records that lie just beyond that enigma that still is the mystery of mysteries. One of the most interesting pieces of information to come through Edgar Cayce's visions is the existence of an ancient hall of records. In this hall are stored the records of an ancient civilization. Today, we are looking for what the Atlanteans left as records about Poseidia. Most people are aware that a search for an Atlantean hall of records has been ongoing at Rostow, the Giza complex near the Sphinx, for decades. But Edgar Cayce, the source of the hall of records idea, stated that there were actually 3 identical halls left by the Atlanteans. In the 1930s, Cayce referred to a Yucatan hall of records that was established nearly 13,000 years ago. My guest today, Dr. Greg Little, is co-author of Mound Builders and an author of Grand Illusions, People of the Web, and the Archetype Experience, all of which cover phenomena and enigmatic experiences often related to the Cayce material. Greg, welcome to Dreamland.
Well, thank you, William. And by the way, I'm coming from Memphis, so we've got a real Tennessee takeover here of Dreamland.
Yeah, I thought I had picked up somewhere along the way that you're here in the great state of Tennessee. It's very nice to be chatting with you at long last.
Well,
Greg,
and it's good to talk to you for the first time, too.
Mm-hmm. Greg, let's begin just by talking for a moment about your connection with the Edgar Cayce Foundation, the Association for Research and Enlightenment, and how you stumbled onto this incredible line of research of which you're bringing forward such amazing revelations.
I actually have been interested in the Cayce readings for roughly 30 years, but my main interest was really with the Cayce health readings and with some of his readings about physiology. But what happened and how I really got involved in this is pretty simple. Back in 1997, my wife and I went on a tour with John Van Auken, who was then the executive director of Cayce's organization. We'd been long-term members, and I had been on a number of tours with the ARE, including one to Egypt, and we went on one to the Yucatan. And during this tour, I became aware that Cayce actually talked about 3 Hall of Records, and up to then I really had no real interest in Cayce's readings about the ancient world. And so I got really involved in asking questions about this, and I was astonished. I just couldn't believe that I didn't know that. That Cayce had mentioned there were 3 Hall of Records. So as a request from people within the Cayce organization, my wife and I began to look at ancient readings. My focus initially was on mound builders and South America, and then that got me interested in Atlantis, and then over time we decided that we really needed to visit this actual site where Cayce said the Yucatan Hall of Records was at Piedras Negras, Guatemala. And we've been touring and going on expeditions in the Bahamas, the Yucatan, and a number of other places since roughly for about the past 3 years. So that's just kind of a thumbnail of it, but I really got involved in this in 97.
And so since 97, did you catch the Atlantis bug then when you were on tour with Van Auken? Was there a search for the Giza Hall of Records on the particular tour that you were involved with?
Well, when we went to Egypt, no. The research in the Giza Hall of Records had pretty much come to a standstill, and I know the background of all that. And actually, as of right now, there has been a ground penetrating radar profiling of the entire Giza Plateau, and it was done by the University of Birmingham in England. It was completed just a few months ago. But we don't think they're going to release those results for an indefinite period of time. But there pretty clearly is something under the Giza Plateau, under the Sphinx, pretty much where Cayce said it was, but we don't know what it is, and I doubt we're going to know much about that. The Bimini Hall of Records is the second one, and that's one that we've been involved in looking for, too. But Cayce said that was underwater, and his exact quote is that it was covered under the slime of ages, and that's really what led us to Guatemala. We know the site, and so we had to go there to try and find, based on Cayce's clues, where it may be, and we think we did find that location.
Yeah, and I certainly want to get to this amazing adventure that you and your wife Laura have been on at Tierra Negres. But first, for the benefit of our listeners, Greg, can you fill us in a little bit on just a background information on what Cayce did say about the destruction of Atlantis and how these halls of records came to be conceived and the execution of the actual construction of them?
Sure. Well, Cayce's history of Atlantis does not really go against what Plato said, but it actually gives more specific descriptions of the island and the people. And actually, there were 5 islands, according to Cayce. And Cayce goes further back into history. For example, Plato never said when Atlantis began. Cayce said it began about 200,000 years ago. And he described it as kind of like Plato did, that it was a maritime culture, an island empire extending from the Straits of Gibraltar all the way to the Caribbean. Now, Cayce said it went through 3 destructions. The first was approximately, well, we know the exact date, but approximately 50,000 B.C. He said that it was caused by explosions of gas under the water around well, really probably in the area of the Caribbean and the east coast of America, and actually there's evidence of that now. The second destruction of Atlantis occurred in 28,000 B.C., and the third one, which was the final destruction, occurred in roughly 10,000 B.C. And Cayce's kind of vague about what occurred then, but it's pretty clear that there was a huge disaster that happened. So that's his background on Atlantis. Now, he said that right before 10,000 B.C., an Atlantean priest, this is pretty strange, but it's really interesting, and it certainly fits dreamland. Right before 10,000 B.C., an Atlantean priest got messages from non-human entities from somewhere out there, almost like another planet. And these entities told this priest that there was going to be some sort of a natural disaster. We believe that was probably a comet impact. And based upon these communications to this particular priest, he formulated a plan to preserve the Atlantean records for all time. They felt they were very important. So this plan was to put them in 3 different spots. One, of course, was at Giza. The second one was on the island of Poseidia, which was probably a mistake because it was sunk. And the third one was in the Yucatan, and it's clear that when the specific individual that then took these records into the Yucatan, he put them in one spot and then moved them after a period of time to a second spot, and the second spot was further inland, and that spot was Piedras Negras. So that's Cayce's background, and it's pretty clear-cut. Almost everybody accepts that's pretty specifically what Cayce said.
And now, by records, Cayce does not necessarily mean scrolls made of papyrus or cuneiform or wall paintings, or does he? Are we talking about traditional ways of storing info, facts, and data, or are we talking about perhaps another method of storing this data?
Well, it would be a traditional method because Cayce's real specific. He said there are 32 stone tablets. And on these stone tablets, and apparently they're carved front, back, sides, a lot like ancient cuneiform tablets were. And he says that the entire history of Atlantis, beginning from the spirit or the soul coming into this realm and then inhabiting physical bodies, and that's where it all began. He said that history is there all the way up to the destruction itself. But it's written on those 32 stone tablets. He doesn't give us their size, but he's very clear. In all 3 spots, whether it's Bimini, Giza, or the Yucatan Hall of Records, all 3 of them have the exact same information in them. So that's really what we're looking for. I mean, the bottom line in this, and the ending of this search will be when we recover some of these tablets. Mm-hmm. Hopefully,
and so, just to clarify then, Greg, we're talking the picture that I'm getting, and correct me if I've misinterpreted what you're saying, it seems that a spirit, perhaps even Itzamna, the Mayan lord of the Milky Way, which has been speculated by Von Aken as one of the names of the priest, or Iltar may have been the Itzamna figure, the priest who took these records. We're talking potentially about a spirit from or of the Milky Way that downloads sacred knowledge, stellar knowledge? Did Cayce give us a hint as to the nature of this knowledge that's preserved on these tablets?
Well, you know, that's an interesting question, and you've put it in a way that I haven't thought about before. In terms of how they knew where they came from, as best as we can tell, it was passed along from generation to generation of Atlantean priests, and it almost like our Bible has been up until the time that it was actually written down. But they wrote these records down. I don't know who really started them or when. I don't think Cayce really talks about that. But Itzamna, yes, Itzamna is a Mayan god, and Iltar was the specific name of the Atlantean priest who was supposed to take the records to the Yucatan. And we do believe that Itzamna and Iltar were probably the very same person. He's also known as Botan, probably Kukulkan. But where that original information came from, I don't know. And I suspect it probably came from the same source that the Atlantean priest got the information from, telling him that Atlantis was going to be destroyed, which looks like an extraterrestrial source. And actually, I was disappointed when I read that. I had never read anything in the Cayce readings about it, and one of the articles I wrote in a monthly newsletter the ARE puts out called Ancient Mysteries was a 2-part article on Cayce's extraterrestrial readings, and there are quite a few, and he's pretty specific about it. There have been visitors to the Earth that are extraterrestrials, and that is in the Cayce readings. So where it really came from, I don't know.
But we'll certainly hopefully be finding out within the near future here, and we'll talk about the possible time for the opening of this Hall of Records and the connection between the Mayan calendar's beginning and the ending of that Mayan calendar. But first, Greg, I wanted to ask you just a little bit more then about the Cayce readings in this regard. You're an insider now with the ARE, I would take it?
Yes, I'm definitely an insider in the ARE.
Okay. This is William Henry. This is Dreamland. We'll continue our conversation with Greg Little in just one moment. This is William Henry. This is Dreamland. We're talking with Greg Little. Greg, before the break, I was asking about just establishing that you're an insider with the ARE. Can you describe for me just a little bit of the quote-unquote gospel of the ARE as concerns Edgar Cayce and the whole Atlantis question? And specifically what I'm wondering about is it my understanding correct that it's possible that Cayce himself believed that he was a reincarnation of Iltar?
Well, he didn't believe he was a reincarnation of Iltar. He believed he was the reincarnation of Ra, an Egyptian priest. Yes, and Cayce did talk quite a bit about reincarnation, which was a surprise to him. He was a fundamentalist Christian. Mm-hmm. In terms of the term gospel of the ARE, actually, skeptics say that people that are in the ARE believe that every word Cayce said is true, and I have yet to find one individual in the ARE that believes every single word Cayce said was true. Mm-hmm. Cayce's truth depended upon a number of things, and he was actually asked about that, and he made it pretty clear about when he was correct and when he wasn't, and particularly about his predictions. He said that these are not necessarily things that are going to happen. But skeptics say everybody that's in the ARE is gullible and blind and just believes everything he said without question, and that's just not true.
Greg, this is so fascinating to me, and I'm sure a lot of listeners, is the time during which Cayce was doing his readings, the 1930s. Can you paint for us just a little bit of a picture of what life was like for Cayce and what some of those predictions actually meant to him during the 1930s?
Well, he actually started giving health readings, and that's how he began. He was born in 1877 in Hopkinsville, Kentucky, and actually, you don't live. William, you don't live all that far from Hopkinsville. It's just north of you, just
right
over the Kentucky line. And actually, it's the site of one of the most famous UFO cases of all time, the Kelly-Hopkinsville creature case, which is fascinating. But Cayce was born there not too long after the Civil War, And that's how you have to put this into context. At that time, there was almost no medical treatment at all. With surgery, what they did was get the individual drunk before they did surgery. And if you had any kind of wound, you were either going to die or they had to cut off whatever extremity the wound was in. There were no antibiotics. So Cayce began actually in diagnosing a problem that he had. And hypnosis, which was then known as mesmerism, had just started, and a local physician who had tried to treat Cayce got interested in a hypnotist who had been traveling around at the time. Cayce had this health problem, and so the physician brought in the hypnotist and Cayce, and he hypnotized him. And in this trance, Cayce gave specific instructions about how to cure this person called Edgar Cayce. So let me make this plain. Cayce's laying there and he's in a trance. He doesn't remember what is said while he's in this trance. And there is some higher self that has taken over his voice so it can speak. And so this higher self gives instructions to the hypnotist and the physician, which they then try, and Cayce is cured. So that's how it began, and he was fairly young at the time. He was a teenager. The physician got really interested in this, and then he started asking Edgar Cayce under this trance state to diagnose other problems. So Cayce did this, and he continued doing these health readings until 1923. That's basically all he did, health readings. And he did thousands of them before 1923. Physicians actually were there almost all the time. They wrote articles about him. They dubbed him the sleeping prophet, and Cayce's health readings are acknowledged by the American Medical Association as the beginning of holistic health in America. So at that time, the 1920s, let me now give a background when he goes into this idea about ancient history. In the 1920s, people believed that America had only been settled 4,000 years ago. They think that's when the first people came in. They had a lot of other interesting ideas, all of which are wrong today. We know to be wrong. But under a reading that Cayce gave in 1923, he was blindsided while he was in this trance by a series of questions. And what came out was reincarnation. He talked about the past, and he talked about the past lives of these individuals he was asked to give readings for. And in these past lives, slowly but surely, a picture of the ancient world emerged, which was completely against what science believed at the time. For example, Cayce said North America was settled at least by 50,000 BC. And he said that in 1923. And that's amazing because at that time, like I said, scientists only thought people had been in America until roughly 4,000 years ago.
Right.
There's so many things like this that he said that were just crazy at the time. And actually, that was crazy up until the 1990s, 1997 to be specific. And now, just in the last few months, we know that people were in North America in 50,000 BC. And that's mainstream archaeology that's found that. He was ignored by most scientists outside of the field of medicine in the 1920s and 30s. That's when he gave all these readings on Atlantis. They all seemed to be crazy, but he collected this large group of devotees that were primarily interested in health. All these other things he said about Atlantis were interesting, but they weren't the real focus. And it was really in the late 30s and 40s when another group got interested in Atlantis and his ancient history. So that's kind of a thumbnail. But at the same time, you have to keep in mind that Cayce's major credibility has always been his health readings, and there's no doubt that those are astonishingly accurate.
Yeah, the reason, Greg, I wanted to talk with you about the 30s is because obviously it was such a pivotal decade. I mean, we know we have FDR looking for the Holy Grail in Mongolia. We've got Adolf Hitler looking for the Holy Grail in the Ark of the Covenant virtually anywhere around the planet. And here comes Edgar Cayce talking about the Yucatan. And at the same time that he's talking about the Yucatan, here we've got we've got Penn down in the Yucatan, we've got Carnegie Mellon in the Yucatan,
yeah.
And all of a sudden there's this focus on this. And then one of the interesting historical footnotes to the FDR administration is the fact that Vannevar Bush, who was one of the inside advisors to FDR, had tremendous interest in the Yucatan as head of Carnegie Mellon, and he actually discontinued support for Mayan research. And I always wondered, is it possible that in the 1930s that they were able to get into this area, which we're going to talk about here now, into the Yucatan, and actually made some key discoveries and then shut it down for all intents and purposes for the rest of academia?
Well, I'm not really sure why they quit doing the research there. I know the background in the archaeological history. The one thing about Cayce that has to be remembered, Cayce was being asked questions by individuals, and they were usually asking questions like in the late 20s, 28, 27, about what stock should I buy or sell, and should I marry this person, what job should I go after. And those are the kind of things that he was answering, the very mundane questions. Before 1929, Cayce was telling people, get out of the stock market. So almost everybody believes he predicted the crash of the stock market. And actually, a couple of weeks ago, I really looked into that. And in fact, I'm sure he did predict it. But yes, there was a lot going on in the Yucatan. It was sort of the heyday of discovering these lost cities. And actually, there are lots more cities which have never been uncovered there, probably hundreds of them. The University of Pennsylvania was deeply involved in this one site called Piedras Negras, and in Cayce's readings, when he brought out the information about the Hall of Records in the early 30s, he was asked about the one in Yucatan, and he told them it's where the University of Pennsylvania is currently working. And he basically stated just a few months ago they found some objects related to a symbol of the Firestone, which is the Atlantean crystal. It's this crystal that most people believe has magical or extremely it's extremely powerful. And he said that some artifacts were taken to the Pennsylvania State Museum and or to Carnegie. So researchers at that time ARE researchers dug in to where the University of no pun intended, to where the University of Pennsylvania was currently working. And they were working in one site and one site only, and that was Piedras Negras, Guatemala. And Piedras Negras lies on a river. It's called the Usumacinta River. It is an amazing site. It was amazing even before we got there. I mean, I knew it was incredible, but after being there, I can tell you that it's kind of overwhelming. It's enormous. It has a mountain that was totally covered by buildings and structures except for the backside, which only had a few, and that's kind of important in this. But Cayce himself knew nothing about any of this. In fact, he really wasn't all that interested in it. It was when he was in this trance and all this information came out, and then after he would be awakened from the trance, he would read it. Some of the things he was interested in, some things he wasn't interested in, and that's an area that Cayce himself, the waking Cayce, he really wasn't all that interested in it, but lots of other people were. Again, Cayce's major focus and most of his readings were on health. And about a third of them were on this ancient history. But I have to say that lots of other people were extremely interested in these halls of records. Most people thought the Egyptian ones would be the ones found first, but Cayce was pretty specific. He said that actually the Guatemalan one appears to be the one that's going to be found first, and he even said, gave a description of who would find it. It's 2 men and a woman.
This is William Henry. This is Dreamland. We'll be right back with Greg Little. This is William Henry. This is Dreamland. I'm talking with Greg Little. Greg's video, the Yucatan Hall of Records, is available now at the unknowncountry.com store. I watched this DVD. It's a really great story, and as you'll see, it's loaded with intrigue, adventure, and high adventure and science. It features special appearances by John Von Auken, co-author with Greg's wife Laura of the Lost Hall of Records, and Andrew Collins, a Dreamland favorite, who's the author of Gateway to Atlantis. You'll get to visit the Piedras Negras site close up. Join Greg on this amazing process of discovery. Get this DVD and share it with your friends. Greg, before the break, we were talking about how you had mentioned that Cayce had said that it would be a man and a woman who would be the lead discoverers of this Hall of Records. Pardon me?
It's 2 men and 1 woman.
Oh, 2 men and 1 woman. Thank you.
Yes.
Yeah. I mean, watching this video, it it's one of those, not really a sleeper. That's not quite the right word, but I'm watching along. It starts out as a standard documentary, and the next thing you know, here's Greg Little, this guy from Memphis, who's suddenly shooting the rapids in the Yucatan, practically deep in the jungle, listening to the monkeys screaming. And I'm just wondering, what in the world must you have been going through your head when you're on this expedition and realizing, hey, I'm deep in the middle of nowhere.
Well, it is deep in the middle of nowhere, let me tell you. When you're sleeping on the riverbank of a polluted river, there's a scene in that DVD. I don't know how much it impressed you, but they're pumping our drinking water out of the river, and there's a dead horse.
The dead horse floating.
Whirlpool right off of the bank. We saw quite a few dead animals in the water. It's quite polluted, and we actually took Cipro, which is a very powerful antibiotic. It's the one that you use if you get anthrax. We took that the entire time we were there because it is just it's an exhausting trip. There were crocodiles about 50 yards from us where we slept on the riverbank. They were in these stones, and we were on the sand. It was so hot and so humid. I was exhausted. I carried 2 gallons of water every morning when we walked around this site. And the first morning I was there, I had drank all 2 gallons within 3 hours. We were there the whole day. It was just an exhausting trip. And it is so big. It is in ruins. Portions of this site look amazing, but some parts of it, the guides that we hired had never even been to. It's just so large. In fact, there were places they did not want to go because it's just so hard and rugged getting in, and there's no paths. And we hired a couple of local Guatemalans who'd spent their entire lives there. Actually, they had hidden themselves in this part of the jungle, and it's a jungle, for 14 years during the Guatemalan Revolution. They left their little town when they were children during the revolution and lived in this area. So they knew it really well, but there were parts where they didn't even come from. And one of the things you can see in several places in the DVD where these guys will just kind of disappear, and they like to play with us. These were the 2 local guys with machetes. And they'd be walking, or we'd be in a cave, and then they're just gone. And then they would kind of pop up and kind of laugh and move on. But it truly is an amazing sight, an exhausting trip. The river is dangerous. It rises and falls drastically. It actually rose about 20 feet while we were there. And we had to get everything off of the boat to get upstream. All of us had to get off. They took all of our supplies up to get less weight off the boat, and then came back and picked us up, and you can see that at the very end of the DVD.
Well, it had to be such a relief, too, once you first got that first glimpse of the Acropolis at Piedras Negras. Talk about that moment and how it compared to, you must have seen those amazing reconstructions of the Red Pyramids from Piedras Negras. How did the reality compare with what you had in your imagination the first time you arrived?
Well, when we first went around this river bend, and the people we'd hired to get us there pointed out this tree on the top, and actually that's where Tatiana Proskurikov, who was an artist, a Russian artist who was hired to do the reconstructions there, she is buried right by that tree. Mm-hmm. But when I first saw it, what you see is just like this huge mountain, a peak, but it's totally densely covered as far as you can tell from the water. But when you see the reconstructions, there's none of those trees there, and it's just solid buildings, and it's incredible. It's palaces and huge ramps, walkways, buildings everywhere, and it goes all the way from the bottom to the top. To give you the size of this site, it's 1.5 miles in length, and actually it's longer than that now. All the old articles say 1.5 miles in length, but in truth it's much longer than that, because only now they're discovering that there were lots of outlying areas, probably areas where people lived, where more commoners lived. And it's about 1 mile inland from this large river. So it's gigantic. But from the water at first, it was exciting, but it was just a little disappointing because I was hoping that we could see some of the structures. But you have to keep in mind, this thing's been in ruins for centuries, so it's totally covered over. We saw areas that had been excavated only last year, 1 year before we got there, and they were totally covered by jungle. So if you don't constantly keep removing the jungle growth, it just grows over in no time at all. So it was a little disappointing at first, but as soon as we got off the boat and looked at this gigantic rock right on the shore, which had to be some sort of pointer, and then when we went inland, it was just overwhelming. Everywhere we went, there's another incredible site. There are pyramids that no one has ever looked into there. There is a tunnel system there. That's we talk about that toward the end of the DVD, and I assume we'll discuss that in the next few minutes. But it's almost totally unexcavated, so it's just like it was in the 1800s. And like I say, there's probably hundreds of these throughout the Yucatan, but this clearly is probably the most important one remaining today.
What was the first sign then, Greg, that you were onto a significant discovery or on the right track as compared to the Cayce readings?
Well, one of the things we did before we got there, we have a map. In fact, I still have it on a door. I had to actually tape this map to a door because it's so large. It covers, it's 6 feet by 5 feet in extent. And it's, what it is the newest archaeological map of the site of Piedras Negras. And we had to shoot that on the door for this video. There's just no other way to do it. So we had actually compared the Cayce readings and his clues. He said that the way into the Hall of Records is overshadowed by a temple. And he had a couple of other clues, but we had narrowed it down to 1 or 2 spots, which, well, fortunately or unfortunately, the guides really didn't want to go there because they had never been there before. They had no idea what we were going to find. We did spend quite a bit of time with a Guatemalan archaeologist who had been at Piedras Negras doing work, and he told us in this is kind of funny. He said, that the work at that site, it's for young people. He said, I'm just too old to do it. This guy was 26.
Wow.
He was in superb shape, and he said, I just can't do it anymore. Because he'd walk up and down this Acropolis over and over, and it's so hot and so humid. And he said his knees got bad while he was there. He was there for 1 summer, working the whole summer. And they were just discovering things in one place and another. And he would run to this one spot to document it when they'd find something. And then somebody's telling him, well, they found another thing at this spot. So he had to run over there, and he said it just wore him out. But the whole place is like that. There are giant stela laying on the ground everywhere. There are carvings everywhere. There are these tabletops, which are known as altar stones, everywhere. Some of them have hieroglyphs on. They're all too large to move. The Guatemalan National Museum in Guatemala City has an incredible display of artifacts from Piedras Negras, including one found by this archaeologist that we talked to, and they had to helicopter it out with 2 U.S. Chinooks, which are the double rotor helicopters. Mm-hmm. But he gave us some clues, and his clues about where he thought there might be a tunnel entrance matched what we came up with before we even went. And when we got there, at least I'm convinced that we know the entrance into the Hall of Records. It's probably an extensive tunnel system, and we know 2 entrances for sure. So we're making a plan to get in there.
And just to reiterate, Penn had been there in the 30s, Carnegie Mellon had been there in the 30s, and also another group that's researching this site is Brigham Young University.
Yes, Brigham Young was there for they had a contract for 7 years. They were there for 6 consecutive years. 2 years ago was the last time they were there. It's a mainstream archaeologist by the name of Huston. It's spelled Houston, but he pronounces it Huston. He was over the Brigham Young research, and this is kind of an interesting coincidence. Huston transferred to the University of Pennsylvania, and he's a professor at the University of Pennsylvania's Archaeology Museum now, and they now have the contract for Piedras Negras again. And they went in this past summer and did a little bit of work and excavation, and they're supposed to do a lot more in the coming summers. Basically, you have like a 4-month window of opportunity there, so you're not caught by the rainy season. In the rainy season, it's dangerous for a lot of reasons, and one of the reasons is the river can rise so quickly, and you really just can't get up the river then, and that's the only way in and out. You cannot walk through the jungle. That's not possible. You have to go by the river, and if it's moving too rapidly, you just can't get on it. It's too dangerous.
One of the key sites that you focused on in the DVD, you called the Pyramid K5, and I'd like to ask you about that when we get back from the break. This is William Henry. This is Dreamland. We'll be right back. This is William Henry. This is Dreamland. My guest today is Greg Little, the producer of the astonishing true life story called The Yucatan Hall of Records, available on DVD from the UnknownCountry.com bookstore. If you like movies like Tomb Raider and Indiana Jones, this is for you. The difference is this is real life, folks, and you can participate in it. Get a hold of this DVD, devour its research, and join this quest and support Greg in his amazing quest to uncover the true secrets of Edgar Cayce's predictions and ultimately the hidden history of the human race. Greg, just before the break, we had brought up the subject of a pyramid, a red pyramid at Piedras Negras that you call K5. Tell us about this pyramid and its significance to your search.
Yeah, okay. First of all, let me give Piedras Negras is so big, the initial archaeologists there laid out a grid, which they labeled A, B, C, D, and so on. And then within each of the areas of this grid, every time they found something, they give it a number. So K5 is in the K sector, and it's the 5th major structure that was found there. It is what remains of K5 today. It's a collapsed pyramid that was quite large. It had 8 large stucco masks on it. In 1933, the year Cayce said that Penn had just uncovered something related to the Hall of Records. At the end of the season, the Penn archaeologists discovered this stucco mask in Pyramid K5. In fact, they extended their stay for several weeks into the rainy season because they thought it was so important. And they did find quite a few things there, and most of those were sent to the Penn Museum as well as to the Carnegie Institute. K5 was built over a long period of time, and what's common in all the ancient Maya sites, as well as later Aztecs, they built a pyramid, and then they build a pyramid on top of the old pyramid, and then they build a newer pyramid on top of that one, and so on. K5, as far as they know right now, has at least 3 different layers. So what we look at when we go to Piedras Negras right now is the outer or the most recent layer of the pyramid structure. But under that are at least 2 others, if not more, and there is probably a tunnel system under K5. The tunnel system probably runs for miles, and what's believed now, even by mainstream Maya archaeologists, is that virtually all Maya sites have extensive tunnel systems.
Absolutely phenomenal. I mean, that just opens up the whole Pandora's box right there, doesn't it?
Well, it does.
Go ahead.
There's another pyramid there, and it's in Sector O. I mean, I hate these names. O13 is the name of the structure. It's a large pyramid, and I'll tell you, I can vividly recall when we decided we had to go there. It's one of the last things we did, and I was just exhausted. I was carrying huge amounts of camera equipment, and I had to carry a lot of water, and it's so hot, and you have to wear long sleeves, and you have to wear long pants. In fact, your pants have to be tucked in because of all the insects. And I was using 100% DEET. A few people probably in the listening audience have ever used 100% DEET. But I'll tell you, it does work. But unfortunately, it will melt plastic and destroy glass, including lenses, if you get any on it. But we walked to Pyramid 013, and the good thing about it is you can sit there right by these two openings that Brigham Young tried to get into a few years ago. And on both sides of the large stairway that originally led up this pyramid, cool air is rushing out. And Brigham Young started putting a tunnel system into it, building a tunnel, but it collapsed on them. And the reason they were building a tunnel is just the year before then, they found a stela on the ground face down in front of 013. This is a couple years ago. So, I mean, this stuff's everywhere. Most of it has not been translated. But it said that under this pyramid there was a cave or tunnel, and that it contained a very important burial and other information. That is what the translation said. So they tried to get in and couldn't, but there is fresh air pouring out of both sides, and it feels very cool. It's almost like air conditioning air. So we know it goes deeply under, probably under the mountain next to it, and it has to run for some length in order for it to be that cool. That was actually the last thing that we found at Piedras Negras. And it sort of led to a theory that there has to be a tunnel system that leads to the base of this giant, it's called the Acropolis, but it's basically a mountaintop. And that mountaintop, we believe, is where the Hall of Records is, at the base of it.
At the base of the mountaintop, so it would be accessed through that 013 site then?
You can access it through 013. On the very back of this mountain, or the Acropolis, at its base, is a pyramid that almost nobody visits. It's in rubble, and you can see us standing on it. And I believe the words I used was that if the Hall of Records is there, this is where it is. And I actually had a rendering done by an archaeological reconstruction artist of that particular pyramid, and it literally is attached. The pyramid is built into the wall of the mountain. That's a surprising thing about Piedras Negras. Most of the pyramids, at least all of them on the Acropolis, are built in to the actual mountainside. I mean, they build right into the mountain. And this one at the very base appears to be one that does have a tunnel system somewhere inside of it. It was partially excavated in the 1940s, and they found quite a few crystals and other things there. But unfortunately, every single artifact and the list of the artifacts was lost in a fire. Yeah, how interesting.
How interesting, right. Any signs of Iltar at Piedras Negras?
The only thing, Piedras Negras has there are some stories that are told on the stela and on several of the other artifacts there. For example, we show from the Guatemala Museum this really incredible red throne that was found on the Acropolis in a pyramid structure at the top of Piedras Negras. It's this red throne, and it's just covered. This beautiful throne is just covered with hieroglyphs. And there is a fairly recent, it's mainstream archaeological translation, and it says that the founder of all the Mayan Empire and all the Maya cities was at Piedras Negras first. They do not give the name. It's assumed that it's Zamna. But the founder was there. And, of course, we found that there are several pyramids at Piedras Negras that are aligned to the rise of Orion's belt. And the rise of Orion's belt occurred in 3114 BC, which is the Maya creation date, and it ends in the year 2012, which is the end of the current cycle in the Maya calendar. So those pyramids are clearly aligned to Orion's belt, and in fact, Orion's belt plays a tremendous role in all Maya civilization and religion, and it's believed that that is where they came from. That's their belief, anyway.
And so we might then hypothesize that could be the source of the Itzamna spirit or inspiration as well, then, couldn't we?
Well, yes, you could. Yeah, that'd be a darn good guess or a good hypothesis that somewhere from Orion's belt, some sort of information comes. They initially saw Orion and Orion's belt as a turtle, and if you actually look at the constellation, and there's a rendering of that on the DVD, you can see how the turtle looked like to them, and that rendering is taken from Maya drawings of the turtle, and there was a crack on the turtle's back, which was made up of 3 stones, and the 3 stones are the 3 stars in the belt of Orion, and that crack is where the spirit of humans came from, according to the Maya. And it's a very interesting idea. The Milky Way fits into this. It's very similar to Native American beliefs. The Milky Way is the river of souls, and the movement of the Milky Way and Orion's belt in context with it are very important.
So we have 3 halls of records described by Edgar Cayce in a trance state. 3 Atlantean priests taking a collection of records to the halls of records, 3 contemporary persons perhaps, or 3 individuals who will recover this hall of records or discover the hall of records. Are we thinking that 2012 could be when the buzzer goes off and this hall of records is revealed, Greg?
Well, that has been suggested to me. I really don't know. I'd love to do it well before then, because I know in 2012 it's not likely I'm going to want to go to Piedras Negras. So we would hope to uncover this well before then, and we're not really giving up at Bimini either. We continue to work there. We looked at a site, and that's on the DVD, called Cerritos off of Yucatan, where almost no one has been. And I'm surprised. It's an ancient Maya underwater breakwater which still exists, and it's made of the same material that the Bimini Road is made from. So we had updates on that kind of research, and we are following a trail which very clearly leads to the mouth of the Usumacinta River, up the river to Piedras Negras. So our next step in this is hopefully get into that tunnel system at Piedras Negras.
Yeah, Greg, you're very lucky to have your wife Laura with you on these expeditions. It's like you two are on the amazing race, and I certainly want to wish you the best of luck in all of your explorations. And once again, for all the listeners, you can participate in Greg's search. You can join Greg and Laura on this amazing process of discovery by getting a copy of the Yucatan Hall of Records. It's available now at the UnknownCountry.com store. I watched this DVD. You've heard Greg's passion. You've seen the incredible obstacles that he's overcome in order to bring this amazing new information to light. Support him. Support John Von Auken and the association, the Edgar Cayce Association, and support Andrew Collins in his quest to unlock the secrets of Atlantis. Support UnknownCountry.com. Greg, before we leave, is there anything else you wanted to add?
Well, we have been routinely returning to the Bahamas. We are still doing that. We are still doing updates on Andros Island and Bimini and Cerritos and other places. There's an update, 2004 update on that DVD, and we continue to do this research. And actually, in January, end of January and February, we are going back into the Bahamas again. And we just got back from the Bahamas just a couple of weeks ago.
And thanks very much, William Henry and Greg Little, for an absolutely fascinating interview. I was riveted the entire time, and I'm glad to hear that Greg's going back to Bermuda. because we'll be talking to you again. It's wonderful. One of the things we try to do on Dreamland is we don't really like to listen too much to armchair explorers. We like people who go there and do that, and Greg Little is right in the forefront of those, traipsing through the jungles in Guatemala. It was a lot of fun. Well, let's hope we find that Hall of Records, and we find it soon. Next up, Linda Moulton Howe. One reporter who loves mysteries is radio's leading science journalist, Linda Moulton Howe. She's an Emmy Award-winning TV producer, documentary filmmaker, and writer, and the reporter and editor for EarthFiles.com, the Internet's most respected edge science website. Today, she's got a great report for us. We've been thinking about Iapetus, that strange moon out there. Could it be an intelligent construction or not? Well, Linda's got a report on it. Here she is from Albuquerque, New Mexico, Linda Moulton Howe.
Thanks, Whitley. Oh, the mysteries around Saturn. The current NASA Cassini mission to Saturn has produced the clearest pictures that human eyes have ever seen of Saturn's rings, which are made out of ice and dust and iron. In addition to the rings, Saturn has 33 moons, including Titan, Saturn's biggest moon and the second largest moon in the solar system after Jupiter's Ganymede. Beyond the mysterious Titan, where methane apparently rains down into dark lakes, Cassini has also taken the clearest images of two other moons which baffle scientists. Those moons are Iapetus and Enceladus from Greek mythology. The Saturnian system is named from the Greek drama about gods and the universe. Saturn was the Titan who ruled over the Olympian gods, including Iapetus. Iapetus was the father of Atlas, who carried the earth on his shoulders, and Iapetus was the father of Prometheus, who was mankind's savior. Saturn ended up killing his father to become lord of the universe. After that murder, revenging giants sprang from the father's blood, and one of those giants was called Enceladus. To see a list and some images of Saturn's 33 known moons and this report, please go to my website, www.earthfiles.com. At the top of the headlines page, click on the report about Iapetus and Enceladus. This week, I talked with a NASA JPL astronomer who is an expert on Saturn's moons. She said that there is no other object in the solar system that is black and white like Iapetus. The leader of Cassini's imaging team compared the black and white pattern to a stitched baseball. The strange moon is only about half the size of our moon, but the white side is so bright that Iapetus was first discovered and named as far back as 1671 by Giovanni Cassini. Yet the side of Iapetus that goes forward in its revolution around Saturn is coal black. Another unexplained anomaly of Iapetus is a bulging line that seems to go around the moon's equator as if the two halves of its sphere were welded together. That bulging line is 12 miles wide, 800 miles long, and around 8 miles high in some places, which is taller than Mount Everest, the tallest peak on Earth. NASA wants to fly closer to Iapetus to learn more, but won't be able to until September of 2007, 3 years from now. As bright as Iapetus's white side is, another of Saturn's moons is even brighter. Enceladus is one of the small inner moons that orbit Saturn, but it reflects almost 100% of the sunlight that strikes it. Enceladus also has a bizarre surface that is partly wrinkled and partly smooth. It was so bright that William Herschel was able to see this little moon in 1789. A Cassini mission scientist who has been trying to make sense of the data that is coming back from infrared spectra and visible images of these two mystifying moons is Bonnie Barati, Ph.D. Dr. Barati is principal scientist in the Division of Earth and Space Sciences at NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory in Pasadena, California. Dr. Barati has been analyzing infrared spectra from the two moons and still does not know the source of the black hydrocarbon substance on one side of Iapetus. Here now is Dr. Barati.
We've known from ground-based observations that Iapetus has two very different sides. One side, one hemisphere, looks like it's just a normal, bright, icy satellite made primarily of water ice, whereas the other side, the other hemisphere, is very dark. It's as dark as lampblack or tar, and it appears to be made composed of some type of organic material, carbon-rich material.
Could it be something like a lump of coal covered with ice?
No, we don't think that the satellite is a lump of coal because coal has a higher density than the satellite does. The density of the satellite is very close to that of water ice. So we think that the dark stuff is something that was essentially just painted on, that it came from some external source.
Why would it be only on one side?
Because Iapetus keeps the same face towards Saturn. So it always has the same hemisphere leading the motion. In other words, when it's orbiting around Saturn, the same hemisphere is always facing the direction of motion.
Like our own Earth's moon.
Exactly. So it turns out that for Iapetus, the side that is dark is that so-called leading hemisphere.
Why should that side only be dark? Because you would think that something coming in would have darkened perhaps the whole moon.
It is believed that the particles that are in orbit around Saturn, they are spiraling into Saturn from the outside. And the model that has been proposed is that they come from a satellite that is going in the opposite direction of Iapetus. Okay, in other words, you are correct. You are exactly right if the material is in the same type of orbit as Iapetus, that it would be evenly coated. So what we've proposed is that there are dark particles coming from an outer satellite that is orbiting in the opposite direction of Iapetus. That seems to work because then they come in the opposite direction and hit only the leading side of the satellite.
Have you gotten any specific identity of the mineral? I mean,
yes, we have. Actually, I'm on the Cassini team, and I'm on an instrument called the Visual Infrared Mapping Spectrometer. That the main purpose of it is to look at the composition of the satellites, and we have a paper that's almost been published. It looks like the bright side is primarily water ice. It's not fresh water ice because the reflectivity, although it's bright, it reflects about 60% of the radiation. It's kind of like dirty snow.
Okay.
So we think there's something there other than pure water ice. So there's some organic material there, some carbonate stuff that's rich in carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, and nitrogen. Kind of crud. I think you can call it crud.
Right.
The dark side, though, has very little water ice. It's primarily minerals and various organic material. In fact, you could go so far as to call it prebiotic. One of the reasons that we're interested in the whole Saturnian system is the fact that it's kind of a laboratory for life.
Right.
You know, the elements, rather the molecules that led to the origin of life on Earth, we think formed in the outer solar system. And we are seeing them in the Saturnian system. It's colder there, and these complex molecules have persisted out there. It's kind of a laboratory for the origin of life.
Now, if it's prebiotic, why do you use the word pre when if there's that much carbon and water ice, why couldn't there possibly be some kind of organic life there already?
Well, for one thing, there isn't any liquid water. And it's also too cold. We don't know of anything that can live in temperatures that cold. We don't think that there was an energy source in order for life to have evolved.
And in terms of liquid water versus ice, is it possible that inside of Iapetus it could be warm enough for there to be liquid water?
We don't think so. We think that it is just too cold out there, even in the interior of Iapetus.
Mm-hmm. But that it's like a laboratory for life frozen in time at this moment.
It has the components for life. Now, here's the other interesting thing, that we don't think that these prebiotic materials could have arisen on Earth. We think they have to have been transported from the outer solar system.
Mm-hmm. And that something like whatever has deposited this carbon on Iapetus may be the same mechanism that has deposited carbonaceous material on Earth that was the precursor for life here?
A similar mechanism. We think that the objects that brought prebiotic materials to the Earth were comets. You know, comets are these icy, these dirty snowballs that seem to come from the outer parts of the solar system.
Right.
And we believe they come from the Kuiper Belt, which is kind of an asteroid belt that's outside the orbit of Neptune. And it might be a similar type object, a Kuiper Belt object captured by Saturn, that led to either a collision or just kind of erosion of the body through time by micrometeorites. That it may have been such a body that led to the dark material. That was the origin, the source of the dark material on Iapetus.
Now, could Iapetus itself have been a body out in the Kuiper Belt that was captured by Saturn and is now this strange moon?
Probably not. It's kind of big, and it would be hard for Saturn to capture it. And one major satellite out beyond the orbit of Iapetus, and that's Phoebe. That's actually orbiting at about 13 million kilometers out there. And that may be a captured Kuiper Belt object. And this may be the origin, at least, of some of the dark material.
Now, does Phoebe, in spectral analysis, seem to have the same kind of coal-like carbon?
That is the main problem with this model. Spectrally, they do not match. The dark side of Iapetus and Phoebe don't match in the visual part of the spectrum. In the infrared part of the spectrum, they match very well.
Huh. And what would explain that?
We don't have an explanation for that. Either the material gets altered or that there's an additional source of the material. We don't have a complete answer for that yet.
Well, Dr. Viola said that in some of her work that it appears that there may be a reddish, possibly iron in the dark apex of the dark side of Iapetus.
Yeah, we seem to see that there is some mineral that's iron-bearing in the infrared.
And would that mean that the hydrocarbon was mixed with iron, or that?
Yes. It's a very complex mixture. That there are minerals and the hydrocarbons.
Sort of like rust-covered coal.
Yeah, kind of like that. Yeah. Although I think rust needs oxygen to, persist. It's not exactly rust. It's something else.
And that's why it's so difficult to figure out what it is?
Yeah, it's very complex, and it also the conditions there are things that we can't really replicate easily in the laboratory.
Would it be fair to say that this dark side of Iapetus is unique so far in anything you've looked at?
Yes, it is unique. There's nothing like this where we see something that reflects, 60% of the light that falls on it. It's as bright as like dirty snow, and then on the other side, it's like as dark as coal or tar.
And is that dark, tarry side spectrum that is so complex, is it unique also in the solar system?
We don't know the answers to that yet. There are some asteroids that look like it in the visible and part of the infrared, but we have not extended our data in the infrared out to long enough wavelengths yet. That we don't know as much about the asteroids as we know about the dark side of Iapetus, so we're not sure if they're similar or not.
Another that has really intrigued me is the picture that shows this bulge around the equator of Iapetus that makes it look as if it were two halves of a ball that were welded together.
Yeah, the walnut picture.
What do you think's going on there?
I don't know. I mean, it could be some major global disruption, or it could be some big crack that came out of a large crater. Although we haven't identified a crater, we just just don't know.
But because it does look structural, doesn't it?
It is structural. We know that it is.
And, it's, I guess the science fiction question would be, is it possible that Iapetus is something's construction? I mean, could some advanced intelligence have made?
No, there's no evidence for that. I mean, I would just quote Carl Sagan, who said, extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. When you have something that you can explain by some natural phenomenon, which, we think we can, even though we don't have an exact answer, there's no reason whatsoever to invoke any type of alien life.
But it certainly is odd that this is bulging so straight around the equator part, isn't it? I think it's around, like the center, like if you drew a line around Iapetus.
Well, but it's also true that if a crater came in and hit near the equator, which isn't all that unusual,
mm-hmm.
that a structural deformity would also have its origin at the equator.
Would it be that straight, though? Or circular? Because it looks like a line going around Iapetus in the photo.
Well, we haven't imaged enough of Iapetus to know that it's going around the entire
mm-hmm.
satellite.
Mm-hmm.
So we can't say that. The fact that it goes around the entire equator, that doesn't show up in the Cassini images.
But have you ever seen anything like that on any other body in the solar system?
Well, we have seen linear features, tectonic features that occur on things like Iapetus. There's a large trench that we believe is caused by a crater on Tethys. Okay, so it could be a type of formation that.
Well, when you and your colleagues have talked about this walnut feature of this bulge seemingly going around the middle of Iapetus, what are the various hypotheses that are discussed?
Well, one of them is that there was some type of, disruption of the satellite. I think it's been shown that satellites can get disrupted and then the gravitational force pulls them back together. So there could have been something like that. Another possibility is that a crater, it could be a stress fracture from a crater. And we do see stress fractures, linear stress fractures that come from, for example, a large crater on Tethys. That's another possibility.
Mm-hmm. And will in 2007, on that flyby, will there be then closer photographs as well as spectral data?
Yes, it's much closer. It should get to within about 1,000 miles of Iapetus.
Wow, that's going to be exciting.
Yeah, it's amazing.
What intrigues you the very most now from all of the Cassini work and all of these moons and the planet itself?
Yeah, I'm studying the images right now from the flyby just a couple days ago of Titan, and I'm just intrigued by what I see. I mean, it's just I'm not in any position now to say anything to the press because I'm still trying to figure out what's going on. But another satellite that intrigues me is Enceladus. This is a satellite that, in fact, just had a flyby yesterday, and we're waiting for the images and other data to come down. This is a satellite that is as bright as freshly fallen snow. It is the brightest thing we know of, and we believe there has to be some type of activity on this satellite, but we haven't seen it yet. So we're waiting with bated breath to see these images and try to understand this intriguing satellite.
And what, in your own mind, do you play around with as a possibility that could explain this if it's a fresh process?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think there are two possibilities, and I'm not sure which one it is. One of them is that there's some type of geysering process, that there's geysers on Enceladus. The other one is that it's just kind of a self-sustaining process where meteorites come in, hit it, and bump off particles, and then they later re-impact Enceladus.
But then the question would be, why would there be so much impact on that one moon?
Well, it turns out that Enceladus is in the midst of a ring. We call it the E ring. So there are already particles there that could preferentially hit it. Possibly that ring was caused by an impact in the past.
Is it literally, I'm going to use the word embedded, in the E-ring, meaning that all of that ring, those little rocks, are going around in some strange, complex orbital mechanics with this moon?
Exactly, except they're not rocks. we think that they are 1 micron particles, tiny little particles.
1 micron?
Yeah.
So you're talking about a ring that is of dust.
Yeah, except it's water ice. It's dust size, but it's water ice.
All ice. And then Enceladus would be composed of that same kind of ice?
Yes, the surface at least. We know that there's something in the interior that's a little bit heavier because the density of Enceladus is actually a little bit higher than water ice. So there's something else in the interior. But the surface, yes, it looks like it would be composed of the same material as that ring.
Have there been any surprises from spectral analysis of Saturn or the rings where there might be a concentration, I don't know, of iron or something that's been unexpected?
We did find in the rings some what look like iron compounds and organics in the rings. The rings are pretty dirty. They have more than just water ice. But I don't think it was totally surprising, but it was neat to find out.
For me, the most fascinating feature of the 2 moons is that bulging line around Iapetus, and I thought I would close with a quote from NASA in one of its news releases about this strange moon. Quote, "The most unique and perhaps most remarkable feature discovered in Cassini images of Iapetus is a topographic ridge that coincides almost exactly with the geographic equator. The ridge is conspicuous in the Cassini image as an approximately 20-kilometer wide band, which is 12 miles, that extends from the far western side of the moon in the image almost to the day-night boundary for 1,300 kilometers, which is 800 miles. It remains almost exactly parallel to the equator within a couple of degrees. The physical origin of the ridge has yet to be explained," unquote. So it's a straight line at the equator on this side of Iapetus that has been able to be imaged by Cassini, that is 12 miles wide, and so far is known to be at least 800 miles long, with at least some of it rising 8 miles up, which is taller than Mount Everest. It must frustrate NASA and Cassini mission scientists not to know if that 12-mile wide band goes all the way around the other side, encircling all 360 degrees of the Iapetus equator. And apparently, Whitley, we're going to have to wait until September of 2007 to find out.
And I wonder always, will we find out? Not because necessarily there is someone trying to keep it secret, but because of what we heard her say and the nervousness that came into her voice when you asked her if there was any evidence of intelligent design. Fear for careers that holds us back and holds all of science back, always. We must be brave and have courage, for if something like this exists in our solar system, it means everything is different from what we thought. Everything.
And isn't it interesting, Whitley, that this very weekend, as we do this report about this incredible Iapetus and even strange Enceladus, that scientists at NASA, even though it's not official, and even though it is now supposed to be something overheard at a private meeting, but that even NASA scientists are saying that they think that their methane data on Mars is substantial enough to make the link to, now I'm going to just use the term, some kind of living organism. We have no idea what. Some kind of life process in the caves and underground on Mars. And this is the headline that seems to be emerging more and more as soon as this unofficial leak came from a couple of the NASA scientists this week. It's my understanding that Dr. Formazano is now who has been so much at the leading edge of suggesting that the methane and perhaps formaldehyde in the Martian atmosphere might be linked to some kind of underground process.
It's my understanding that in the Netherlands also this weekend that he may be making a further announcement on his atmospheric analysis. And don't you have the sense that we're not going to get out of 2005 without that headline that everybody's been waiting for?
Well,
and if there is some kind of life on Mars, well, these strange moons of Saturn may have even more surprises for us, even if it's cold.
You know, I have to tell you, you talk about interesting times. This is an interesting time to be alive, and people always ask me, why are you, the creator of Superstorm and the brains behind the Day After Tomorrow movie, so darned optimistic about everything? I'm optimistic because I think human beings are going to win, and we're going to win big if we face the presence, if we find life and the remnants of past and perhaps intelligent life in our own solar system, and the courage to face the changes that this implies. It's very exciting times. Thank you very much, Linda Moulton Howe, for an extremely provocative report. This is Whitley Strieber, and this has been Dreamland. Next week, a lot of exciting stuff coming up. Mysterious Powers is back with the secret teachings of plants. This is an extraordinary idea. A man who has discovered that it's possible to actually communicate with those sensitive beings all around us. It's possible to take yourself and your own mind and heart to a new level simply by coming into contact with the brilliance of the creatures that live around us, who we have always assumed were simply unconscious wallflowers. Well, they're wallflowers all right, but conscious or unconscious? Find out next week on Mysterious Powers. Then on Dreamland, I'm going to be back with Mark Hall, a subject that absolutely fascinates me. Thunderbirds, America's living legends of giant birds. Why does it fascinate me? Because I saw one. I saw one with my own eyes when my son was just a little baby in Coscob, Connecticut back in 1979, spring of 1979. I've never forgotten it, so expect quite an adventure on Dreamland next week. And for subscribers, a very special journey with a very special man, Bob White. Bob White has been struggling for years to get proper analysis of an artifact he believes came from a UFO, and he's made progress, and it is fascinating.
From Nashville, this is Dreamland. Take a deep breath, folks, for today our subject is the temple of records that lie just beyond that enigma that still is the mystery of mysteries. One of the most interesting pieces of information to come through Edgar Cayce's visions is the existence of an ancient hall of records. In this hall are stored the records of an ancient civilization. Today, we are looking for what the Atlanteans left as records about Poseidia. Most people are aware that a search for an Atlantean hall of records has been ongoing at Rostow, the Giza complex near the Sphinx, for decades. But Edgar Cayce, the source of the hall of records idea, stated that there were actually 3 identical halls left by the Atlanteans. In the 1930s, Cayce referred to a Yucatan hall of records that was established nearly 13,000 years ago. My guest today, Dr. Greg Little, is co-author of Mound Builders and an author of Grand Illusions, People of the Web, and the Archetype Experience, all of which cover phenomena and enigmatic experiences often related to the Cayce material. Greg, welcome to Dreamland.
Well, thank you, William. And by the way, I'm coming from Memphis, so we've got a real Tennessee takeover here of Dreamland.
Yeah, I thought I had picked up somewhere along the way that you're here in the great state of Tennessee. It's very nice to be chatting with you at long last.
Well,
Greg,
and it's good to talk to you for the first time, too.
Mm-hmm. Greg, let's begin just by talking for a moment about your connection with the Edgar Cayce Foundation, the Association for Research and Enlightenment, and how you stumbled onto this incredible line of research of which you're bringing forward such amazing revelations.
I actually have been interested in history. For example, Plato never said when Atlantis began. Cayce said it began about 200,000 years ago. And he described it as kind of like Plato did, that it was a maritime culture, an island empire extending from the Straits of Gibraltar all the way to the Caribbean. Now, Cayce said it went through 3 destructions. The first was approximately, well, we know the exact date, but approximately 50,000 BC. He said that it was caused by explosions of gas under the water around, well, really probably in the area of the Caribbean and the east coast of America, and actually there's evidence of that now. The second destruction of Atlantis occurred in 28,000 BC, and the third one, which was the final destruction, occurred in roughly 10,000 BC. In case he's kind of vague about what occurred then, but it's pretty clear that there was a huge disaster that happened. So that's his background on Atlantis. Now, he said that right before 10,000 BC, an Atlantean priest, this is pretty strange, but it's really interesting, and it certainly fits Dreamland. Right before 10,000 BC, an Atlantean priest got messages from non-human entities from somewhere out there, almost like another planet. And these entities told this priest that there was going to be some sort of a natural disaster. We believe that was probably a comet impact. And based upon these communications to this particular priest, he formulated a plan to preserve the Atlantean records for all time. They felt they were very...
The Hall of Records on the particular tour that you were involved with?
Well, when we went to Egypt, no. The research in the Giza Hall of Records had pretty much come to a standstill, and I know the background of all that. And actually, as of right now, there has been a ground penetrating radar profiling of the entire Giza Plateau, and it was done by the University of Birmingham in England. It was completed just a few months ago. But we don't think they're going to release those results for an indefinite period of time. But there pretty clearly is something under the Giza Plateau, under the Sphinx, pretty much where Cayce said it was, but we don't know what it is, and I doubt we're going to know much about that. The Bimini Hall of Records is the second one, and that's one that we've been involved in looking for, too. But Cayce said that was underwater, and his exact quote is that it was covered under the slime of ages, and that's really what led us to Guatemala. We know the site, and so we had to go there to try and find, based on Cayce's clues, where it may be, and we think we did find that location.
Yeah, and I certainly want to get to this amazing adventure that you and your wife Laura have been on at Pierre Negres. But first, for the benefit of our listeners, Greg, can you fill us in a little bit on just a background information on what Cayce did say about the destruction of Atlantis and how these halls of records came to be conceived and the execution of the actual construction of them?
Sure. Well, Cayce's history of Atlantis does not really go against what Plato said, but it actually gives more specific descriptions of the island and the people. And actually, there were 5 islands, according to Cayce, and Cayce goes further back and very important. So this plan was to put them in 3 different spots. One, of course, was at Giza. The second one was on the island of Poseidia, which was probably a mistake because it was sunk. And the third one was in the Yucatan, and it's clear that when the specific individual that then took these records into the Yucatan, he put them in one spot and then moved them after a period of time to a second spot, and the second spot was further inland, and that spot was Piedras Negras. So that's Cayce's background, and it's pretty clear-cut. Almost everybody accepts that's pretty specifically what Cayce said.
And now, by records, Cayce does not necessarily mean scrolls made of papyrus or cuneiform or wall paintings, or does he? Are we talking about traditional ways of storing info, facts, and data, or are we talking about perhaps another method of storing this data?
Well, it would be a traditional method because Cayce's real specific. He said there are 32 stone tablets. And on these stone tablets, and apparently they're carved front, back, sides, a lot like ancient cuneiform tablets were. And he says that the entire history of Atlantis, beginning from the spirit or the soul coming into this realm and then inhabiting physical bodies, and that's where it all began. He said that history is there all the way up to the destruction itself. But it's written on those 32 stone tablets. He doesn't give us their size, but he's very clear. And all three spots, whether it's Bimini, Giza, or the Yucatan Hall of Records, all three of them have the exact same information in them. So that's really what we're looking at in the Cayce readings for roughly 30 years. But my main interest was really with the Cayce health readings and with some of his readings about physiology. But what happened and how I really got involved in this is pretty simple. Back in 1997, my wife and I went on a tour with John Van Auken, who was then the executive director of Cayce's organization. We'd been long-term members, and I had been on a number of tours with the ARE, including one to Egypt, and we went on one to the Yucatan. And during this tour, I became aware that Cayce actually talked about 3 Hall of Records, and up to then I really had no real interest in Cayce's readings about the ancient world. And so I got really involved in asking questions about this, and I was astonished. I just couldn't believe that I didn't know that. That Cayce had mentioned there were 3 Hall of Records. So as a request from people within the Cayce organization, my wife and I began to look at ancient readings. My focus initially was on mound builders and South America, and then that got me interested in Atlantis, and then over time we decided that we really needed to visit this actual site where Cayce said the Yucatan Hall of Records was at Piedras Negras, Guatemala. And we've been touring and going on expeditions in the Bahamas, the Yucatan, and a number of other places since roughly for about the past 3 years. So that's just kind of a thumbnail of it, but I really got involved in this in 97.
And so since 97, did you catch the Atlantis bug then when you were on tour with Van Auken? Was there a search for the Giza